Aqua Security, I believe, following their acquisition of Argon, and you'd been at Argon, I can't remember, I think about the 8th employee, if memory serves, and you helped build the business up from, I guess it was a startup. So the first question is, what, if you like, did you learn at Argon that you've now brought over to Aqua Security, and you're now obviously a supply chain security expert? So yeah, what happened at Argon that sort of helped you on your way?
So the beginnings of Argon were super interesting. I think when we started, our founders believed in the problem and they understood the problem just from their own experience, right, in leading development and security innovation. But it was still very new to the markets, this concept of software supply chain security or software supply chain attacks. But shortly after we started, what happened was that sophisticated supply chain attacks like SolarWinds or CodeCov and Log4j, which were things that we really hadn't seen before, started happening. So I think being at this stage of building heavily and quickly when this was all happening taught us a lot about what needed to be done technology-wise. So it created a situation where companies understood that they needed something to secure themselves against this, but the how was still up for defining, right? So we really took it upon ourselves to define the how and innovate in that space. Fast forward to when we joined Aqua, I think the synergy between the companies was very natural. Aqua is a cloud-native application protection platform, and that means securing the application both when it's running and when it's being built. I think our big differentiator is that we were bringing in a lot of new expertise, and expertise that was up to the times from what we have seen of recent supply chain attacks. So we really embedded ourselves into that part of the company. And I think it's really cool because our customers are getting enterprise-ready software with startup-level innovation.
Okay, and I mean, the size of the problem, I think Aqua Security, your own data says that sort of year on year, I think there's is a 300% sort of increase in supply chain software attacks or breaches, whatever. So I guess it'd be good to understand sort of why that number of attacks is on the increase. And putting it another way, what are businesses getting wrong in terms of supply chain security? What are the issues?
So I think if we break it down to its simplest form, attackers go for what has the most impact and what is the easiest thing to do. And when it comes to the software supply chain, I think it's a perfect storm. On the one side, like one critical vulnerability in the code can lead to open doors in everyone that is consuming that piece of software. So the blast radius is massive. And on the other side, with anything that has complexity, so processes that rely on a lot of tools, a lot of people, a lot of steps, like agile software development and the modern software supply chain, it's likely that you'll have a few, if not many, things unsecured. So it's also relatively easy for them to find, let's say, an open window. They don't necessarily need an open door. So on the one side, I think I understand why attackers are targeting this and why we're seeing such a big increase. I think it's not so much about businesses getting it wrong as much as them not modernizing as quickly as the attackers have. So security on the application lifecycle is not a new thing, but security for the full application lifecycle is. So I think companies are still having to do the shift from looking at application security as just code scanning to actually looking at all of the different layers of application security, like the tools that you're using or like the pipelines that you're using to go through this process. So there's still modernization to happen from companies there.
Okay, and in terms of that modernization, I mean, what does it take to build immutability and security into the software development pipeline? What do people need to do?
So I think what we're seeing is this need for multi-layered security. So code security is still really important, right? So scanning the application and your code for critical vulnerabilities, for secrets, for misconfigurations, this continues to be important, but it's only one part of the puzzle. So what we really believe in is that plus process security. So things like integrity scanning and the SBOM generation and security manifests, as well as infrastructure security, which is actually looking at the tools that you're using to build and making sure that those are configured correctly. Those three layers are what's really needed altogether to build immutability into your pipeline.
Okay, and I think Aqua Security, you talk about the golden pipeline for securing the pipeline. So is that what you've just outlined, though, the three steps, or are we talking, is that something slightly different?
So I think the golden pipeline is taking these technology features, which are the three layers that I've outlined, and putting them into a process that is easy to replicate. I think the idea of anything golden is something that is reliable, that is consistent, that is automated, and that the outcome is good. So when we talk about the golden pipeline, we're more talking about how you actually implement this in a way that you can scale across the organization without adding a ton of workload to your security or your development teams. So the technology piece are those three layers, but the golden pipeline itself is more of an implementation model.
Okay, and just in terms of implementation, I mean, at one level, if you know what you're supposed to do, theoretically, you should be able to do it. But are there obstacles? I don't know whether there are human obstacles, technology obstacles to actually, making that golden pipeline a reality. So
I would say the golden pipeline is a response to the challenges that we found along the way from our customers and our prospects. So you have, let's say, these three pieces of technology, right? You have strong code scanning, and you have strong process security, and you have all of the right tools to build in also infrastructure security. But then you meet certain challenges when you try to implement it. So for example, you want to secure from the get-go, but you shouldn't, right? Because you're working with teams that are used to working like development in a very agile, very quick, very automated way. So there's a lot of things like automating the scanning, making sure that it's built into their tools and that the feedback is built into their tools and the feedback is automated. Making sure that the feedback gives them enough information to actually make the fixes that they need to fix without having to go outside to look for additional resources or information. And actually keeping logs and track of everything that you have built so that you can always go back to it and understand, hey, what do I have where? So those are some of the pieces that we understood along the way were very, very necessary when interacting with dev and security teams. And I think that's what we built into this process of the golden pipeline, which the whole idea is that you start clean. So you embed yourself into the development tool and you scan what is already inside. Then you keep clean so that you make sure that everything new that gets outed meets the standard that security has defined in terms of security scanning and in terms of security checks. And lastly, that before you release this application to production, that you give a stamp of approval and then you keep that stamp of approval. And we see that stamp of approval as a mix of a software bill of materials, which tells you everything that is inside of what you have built, but also security history of what this actually go through and who is connected to this and where it was built. So you can always go back to the original source. So those are all things that we see as critical in the process. The three layers are embedded inside of it. And when you automate it in a way that I just mentioned, I think it really allows for both teams to just run.
Okay, and it just occurred to me, and if it's a stupid question, apologies, but what you're describing, DevSecOps exists. Is this what you're describing? Was DevSecOps sort of slightly different? Is what you're doing complementary to that? Just how you would say you fit with?
It's a way to do DevSecOps. So we believe in DevSecOps, and then, like you said, DevSecOps is not necessarily a new context, a new idea. But I think that has shape-shifted throughout the years. So if you mentioned DevSecOps 5 to 10 years ago, it was having tools that your developers could go to in order to scan and in order to check. Whereas the message and the way has completely changed now, right? If you're asking your developers to go to an external tool to do security, which is not in their job description by default, it's not going to flow. So I think this is a way to implement DevSecOps. Yeah.
Okay, and in terms of the sort of the value and the return on investment people get from the sort of golden pipeline approach, what are the, I mean, clearly better security is a major, but more generally, you know, what other things are people getting from when they're using this approach?
So there's many, and I think different companies find it more in different ways, but there are three that I think we see really consistently. The first one is that companies are really able to reduce the cost of remediation because they build the process of vulnerability patching into the development flow. And earlier in the development flow. So they're able to fix things as they're introduced, as opposed to waiting until they're getting ready to release, or even worse, already released, when the cost is much, much higher. The second thing is that they are really able to increase application security productivity because instead of having to manage, let's say, 3 different tools for code scanning and a different tool for image scanning, and in addition to that, the communication to the developer within their dev tool, you're able to kind of orchestrate that all from a single place. So we really see them kind of shifting also their work, their way of working, instead of taking their time to fix these things manually or create tickets or having to push people around, and they're really able to build the program and automate it. Which really increases their productivity and enhances the overall program success. And the last thing, which hopefully shouldn't feel the cost, but we have seen it in comparison with companies who didn't have our solution, is that they really are able to protect revenue at risk by making sure that the applications that they release are secure to begin with. Obviously, you can imagine the financial impact of releasing an application that has a critical vulnerability that gets exploited. When we look at certain cases in the past where that has happened, and we compare between customers that had deployed our solution versus companies that hadn't, we can see that the financial impact, the change or the variation of the financial impact is really, really significant.
And in terms of yourselves, Aqua Security, what's the unique features of your, I've got to get this right, cloud native application protection platform, I think, isn't it? CNAPP for short. So what is it that you do for securing the supply chain that makes you stand out, if you like?
I think the beauty of how Aqua chooses to do CNAPP is that you get both best of breed and best of platform. So if traditionally you had to choose between them, I think we really have found a nice sweet balance that allows customers to have both of them. So if you look at the supply chain security space specifically, we are doing things in our solution that no one else is able to do yet. Things like integrity scanning, right? So scanning the actual development pipeline for sophisticated attacks like SolarWinds and Cold. Things like open source health. Basically looking at open source security as what is my portfolio of open source and what is used where and what is the overall health of this. It's much more than just scanning for vulnerabilities. It's scanning for security metrics. Things like next generation SBOM. So something like I was mentioning before, where we don't only just give you a list of what you have, but we actually give you the history of what that went through. So these are all really unique features that are purpose-built to tackle the challenge of software supply chain attacks. So we have, in that way, best of breed, as opposed to taking solutions that were built for something else and trying to shift them left or shift them right. And I really think it's the same type of expertise that you see from a runtime security solution. So you get these best of breed, purpose-built technologies within the platform. And so these things are truly embedded, truly communicating within a single platform. So you also get that best of platform. And I think this is kind of changing the game of how companies tackle the challenge. If traditionally you would look at, you understand that application is everything from when you're building it to when you're releasing it. But before, when it came to security, you would look at it as 3 separate things. You would look at it as the code security, the cloud security, and the runtime security. Whereas I think what we allow for is to really secure the length of the application lifecycle with all of its complexities and all of its integration and all of its stages within a single place. So we also look at a single application and not these three different things that you need to look at separately.
Okay, and in terms of in finishing, what else is on Aqua Security's horizon at the moment? You're obviously busy doing this, but do you got more releases coming up? I don't know if you're expanding the company's presence. Anything you're able to share? Obviously, you're not going to tell me any trade secrets, but are there things you can tell me about what's happening at Aqua Security?
So I don't want to give too many spoilers, but basically, the first thing is that we're still doing deep innovations in supply chain security, cloud security, and runtime security. So like I mentioned, some of these features before, those are really like forward thinking, and that's where we're continuing to go with our technology. I think the second thing and the biggest thing right now is that we're really connecting the dots between them. So we are talking compound risk, showing compound risk, and really changing the way that customers visualize and fix risk across the application lifecycle. So I believe we are really moving away from, or not moving away, but adding on top of this capability of looking at supply chain, code, and runtime to looking at it as a single and treating it as a single application. So really connecting the dots and talking compound risk. And the third thing is we will continue with our hyper focus with our customers and being embedded in their digital transformation story. So that is something that has been maintained throughout the Aqua history while we continue innovation and the connection or the empowering of the platform.
Okay, but I'm guessing if we had a conversation towards the back end of the year, there might, between now and then, there might be some interesting developments that people need to look out for. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I can tell you already for the end of this quarter, we have some really big, I call them chunky features because they have a lot of meat inside of them. Really exciting features, specifically in that platform space, right? So in connecting the dots.
Okay, well, it's been great to chat to you. So I really appreciate you giving me the time, Nurit. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philip. Thanks for taking the time.